My boyfriend smirked. I only dated you to make her jealous. You were never even a real girlfriend. I left crushed. Weeks later, karma struck in a way that left him speechless. Laura, you light up my whole day just by walking in. That's what Steven told me the night we first met. His words came so easily, paired with a crooked smile and a glimmer in his eyes that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. After so long on my own, it was almost overwhelming to have someone notice me like that. I should have been cautious, but instead I let those words burrow straight into my heart. I wasn't looking for anyone. Truly I wasn't. I'd settled into a quiet rhythm. Work, evenings with books, the occasional lunch with a friend. My world was calm, steady, predictable. And yet there he was. This man with rolled-up sleeves, dust on his jeans, and a kind of restless energy that made it seem like he was always on the edge of creating something big. Before I go further, thank you for being here and listening. If you believe women deserve love built on honesty and respect, please subscribe. It's free and helps share these truths. Steven had been hired to rewire part of my neighbor's house, and I ran into him while carrying groceries. He offered to help me with the bags, insisting even though I said I could manage. By the time we reached my door, he had already cracked a joke about my weightlifting skills, and told me about his dream of running his own electrical business. It was casual light, but there was a spark. The kind you don't forget once it hits. I wasn't naive. I'd been through storms before, relationships that left me drained, questioning my worth. But Steven was different. Or at least he looked different. He asked questions about my day and actually listened to the answers. He laughed at my dry humor and even teased me about how seriously I organized my spice rack. I liked how he carried himself with a kind of self-made pride, talking about building a business from the ground up, even if he admitted the process scared him. He needed stability and I had plenty to give. That became clear quickly. Within weeks, he started sharing his frustrations with me. How overwhelming it was to manage invoices, how he worried clients wouldn't take him seriously, how late nights left him exhausted. I slipped into the role naturally, proofreading his emails, drafting his first website page and dropping off hot dinners when I knew he'd be too tired to cook. It didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. Like maybe I was part of something important, something growing. Before long we had little routines. Friday nights became takeout and movie nights, where we'd argue over whether pizza or Chinese was the better choice. Sundays we'd walk through hardware stores together, Steven explaining the difference between wire gauges while I teased him for making it sound like poetry. He laughed every time I held a flashlight for him, saying I was the only one who ever got it just right. Small things, ordinary things, but they became ours. I began picturing a future in those moments. Not a grand one, not the kind written in novels, but something steady. I imagined us coming home from work, sharing takeout containers, laughing about customers or neighbors. I imagined holidays spent side by side, him fixing the string lights while I fussed over the turkey. It wasn't about fireworks. It was about peace. After years of chaos that felt like everything. One evening I surprised him with a gift. A simple silver bracelet engraved with the name of his business, Weston Electric. His face softened when he saw it, though he quickly hid it behind a joke. Guess that makes me official now, huh? He said, slipping it onto his wrist. It wasn't much, but to me it was a marker of faith. A way of saying I believe in you. I believe in us. But somewhere along the line something shifted. First it was small. He'd glance at his phone more often, smirk at messages I wasn't privy to. When I'd talk about us, about maybe planning a weekend away or how nice it would be to host a little dinner for friends, his responses grew shorter, distracted. He was there in body but not fully with me. I brushed it off. Told myself he was tired, stressed, drowning in the weight of starting a business. I reminded myself how much he had on his plate and how easily men like him could get swallowed by ambition. I excused the late replies to my texts, the cancelled plans, the way his hugs felt a little less anchored each time. But in the quiet moments, doubt crept in. I'd lie awake after he fell asleep, staring at the bracelet on his wrist, wondering if it meant as much to him as it did to me. I'd catch the way his eyes darted when I mentioned the future, how he'd changed the subject before I could finish a thought. One night, sitting at his kitchen table, I tried to tell him how much he meant to me. I told him I hadn't felt this safe, this steady in years. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile you give out of obligation, not affection. And though my heart sank, I pushed it down. I convinced myself it was just fatigue. I didn't know then that I wasn't building a life with him. I was holding up a stage set. He had cast me in a role I didn't audition for, one I didn't even know existed. But at that moment in that chapter of my life I thought it was love. The first sign came as something so ordinary I almost ignored it. Thursday evening. Groceries in my arms, the cool air biting my cheeks as I juggled paper bags through his front door. I remember humming absent-mindedly, setting the bags on the counter, pulling out fresh vegetables, the smell of garlic clinging to my fingers. The routine should have comforted me. Instead, there was a quiet unease in my chest, the same one I had been pushing aside for weeks. Stephen walked in not long after, hair a little damp with sweat, boots caked in dust from a job site. "Smells good already," he said, brushing a quick kiss across my cheek. I smiled, though it felt weaker than usual. That smile had become my armor lately, easy, automatic, covering questions I didn't want to voice. Dinner simmered on the stove, the gentle hiss of oil filling the room, while I crouched by the coffee table he had promised to fix months ago. The leg wobbled dangerously every time someone set down a glass, and finally I'd grown tired of waiting. With a screwdriver in one hand and determination in the other, I knelt down, balancing the wood steady. That's when his phone buzzed. Loud, insistent, cutting through the air. Stephen glanced at the screen, and in a heartbeat his expression changed, eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen when he looked at me lately. "I'll take this outside," he muttered quickly, sliding the balcony door open. At first I didn't care. Calls came and went. I wasn't the type to hover or question every ring. The door remained cracked, letting in a cool gust that stirred the curtains. My focus was on aligning the screws, but then I heard it. My name drifting in from the balcony like a whisper meant to shatter. "She's sweet, but she's not you." The words landed like a blow I hadn't braced for. My hand froze on the screwdriver. My stomach clenched so tightly it felt as though the air itself had been knocked out of me. I waited, praying I had misheard, but the voice carried on. His voice. "Yeah, she buys me things, makes it all look real. But you know I'd drop it the second you said the word." My ears burned hot, my pulse roaring in my head. Monica. The name was unmistakable. His ex. The woman he swore was ancient history, a closed chapter. And yet here he was, clinging to her voice like a lifeline, tossing me aside in the same breath he used to flatter her. I wanted to storm outside, fling the door open, demand answers. Instead I stayed crouched at the table, my knuckles white against the wood. I forced myself to listen. Every syllable cut deep, each one peeling away another layer of illusion I had wrapped myself in. He talked about me like I was a prop in some performance. A placeholder. A perfect distraction until Monica returned. The gifts I gave, the dinners I cooked, the nights I stayed up proofreading his invoices. All of it reduced to stage dressing for his pride. Bless. That's what it felt like. Every word another shard, slicing from the inside out. Still I kept my composure. My fingers trembled so badly I nearly dropped the screwdriver, but I tightened that last bolt with a precision that bordered on defiance. If he wanted me to be the dutiful supporter, then fine. I'd fix the table while he confessed my irrelevance to another woman. I remember the smell of dinner turning bitter, garlic starting to burn on the stove. My stomach churned so violently that the thought of food made me ill. Yet I couldn't move. Not yet. I needed to hear the full truth spill out of his mouth, unfiltered, unaware that I was absorbing every single betrayal. "She'll understand eventually," he said with a laugh, one that dripped with arrogance. "She's tough, she'll land on her feet. But you," his voice softened, syrupy sweet, "you're the only one I wanted anyway." I didn't cry. That surprised me most of all. My eyes burned, but no tears came. It wasn't sadness that gripped me, it was clarity. Cold, sharp, unshakable clarity. When the call finally ended, I heard the balcony door slide shut. Stephen whistled softly, casual, like he had just finished discussing the weather instead of dismantling everything I believed in. I stayed kneeling at the coffee table, pressing my palm flat against the newly tightened leg. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady them against the wood. I felt nauseous, but I also felt something stronger. Resolve. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't walking out of this with heartbreak. I was walking out armed with truth. I wasn't losing love because it had never been love to begin with. Not the way I gave it, anyway. I stood slowly, wiped my palms against my jeans and took a steadying breath. Dinner hissed angrily on the stove, forgotten. The groceries I had carried with care sat half unpacked on the counter. The room looked ordinary, but I no longer belonged in it. When Stephen stepped back into the living room, I didn't meet his eyes. I couldn't, not yet. If he looked at me, he might notice the storm building, the fire he had unknowingly ignited. So I said nothing. Not about the call. Not about Monica. I let silence shield me. But deep inside, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. His story with me had just ended. And mine, well, mine was only beginning. The balcony door slid shut behind him and I stayed frozen in place, still crouched by the coffee table I had just finished repairing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. When Stephen strolled back in, he did it like a man with no weight on his conscience. Whistling under his breath, his phone tucked casually in his pocket, his lips curving into that same grin he had always used to disarm me. "Smells like you're making something good," he said, glancing toward the stove. His tone was playful, light, almost mocking in its normalcy. That was the moment the fury in my chest snapped into focus. I wasn't going to carry this truth in silence. I wasn't going to protect him with my quiet. I heard everything. The words came out steady, though my voice trembled at the edges. He froze mid-step. His smile collapsed, leaving his face slack and pale. The color drained from his cheeks as if someone had pulled a plug and let it all spill out. His eyes darted toward the balcony, then back at me as though hoping I meant something else. "Laura," he started, stammering, reaching for the right excuse, but nothing came. I didn't give him the chance. "You said I was just something to keep you busy. That all of this," I gestured around the apartment, the groceries on the counter, the tools I had just put away, the dinner sizzling on the stove, "was an act for her benefit." His mouth opened and closed, useless, like a boy caught stealing. He couldn't deny it. He knew I had heard it all. "Text Monica," I said firmly. "Tell her I'm gone." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on both of us. His throat worked as if he wanted to argue, but no words came. For the first time, he looked small to me. His broad shoulders hunched, his eyes wet with panic, his confidence shattered. But even in that silence, I could see it in his face. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't text her. He couldn't, because deep down he knew Monica didn't want him. She wasn't waiting for him, not really. She was stringing him along, and he was clinging to the fantasy like it was oxygen. Me. I was just the mask he wore to convince himself he still had worth. The realization didn't break me, it empowered me. So I decided to give him a goodbye he wouldn't forget. I walked over to his desk and pulled the Wi-Fi router from the wall, the cord dangling in my hand. His eyes widened. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I moved to the breaker box, the same one I had helped him install months before, when we had laughed about how many labels he messed up on the switches. My hand hovered for only a second before I flipped the breakers, one by one. The hum of appliances ceased. The living room dimmed to shadows. The proud little kingdom he had built, the tools and gadgets he adored, all powered down under my hand. "Laura, stop." His voice cracked, part panic, part disbelief. He took a step toward me, then hesitated, as though he wasn't sure if I'd throw the whole box out the window. I turned to him, calm in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm not your technician anymore." The words landed like a final nail sealing a coffin. I set my house key on the counter with a quiet click, grabbed my bag and headed for the door. He found his voice then. "You're being dramatic. You're making a mistake." His words chased me down the hallway, sharp and desperate. But I didn't stop. My footsteps echoed against the walls as I pushed open the front door and let the night air hit me. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I could breathe. Behind me, his voice rose louder. "You'll regret this." I kept walking. The elevator doors closed in front of me with a metallic sigh, sealing him on the other side. My reflection stared back at me in the dull glass. Face pale, eyes burning, lips pressed tight, but I looked steady. Stronger than I had in a long time. When the elevator opened to the ground floor, the world felt new. Outside, the streetlights glowed warm against the pavement, the city alive with sounds of traffic and laughter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I knew it was him. I stepped out into the night, leaving behind the man, the lies, the apartment, and the darkness I had left in my place. His world had gone dark, and mine had just found the light. By the next morning, I could already feel the shift in the air. My phone buzzed with a message from an old friend. "Hey, I heard something. Are you okay?" The words sat heavy in my chest. It hadn't even been 12 hours since I left Steven's apartment and already the whispers had started. He moved fast. That was his way, spin the story before I had a chance to speak. By the time I opened social media, I saw his fingerprints everywhere. A post on his feed. Sometimes the people closest to you cause the most chaos. A vague caption, paired with a black and white photo of him staring off dramatically. His followers, our mutual acquaintances, his old classmates, even clients, were in the comments. Stay strong, bro. You don't deserve toxic energy. Cut her loose. I could almost see the smirk on his face as he soaked it up. Then the calls began. A neighbor I'd once invited over for coffee asked me outright if I had snapped. Another friend muttered that Steven said I sabotaged his apartment out of spite. The words stung not because they were true but because they were designed to stick. He wanted people to picture me as the unstable woman who couldn't handle rejection. And the worst part? Some people believed him. At the grocery store that weekend, I ran into a mutual acquaintance, someone I'd helped design flyers for months ago. She avoided my eyes, mumbling a rushed hello before pushing her cart in the opposite direction. I could feel the judgment hanging between us, unspoken but sharp. I didn't chase after her. I didn't chase anyone. Because while Steven was busy painting me as unhinged, I knew something he didn't. The truth doesn't need a campaign. It doesn't need hashtags or pity comments. The truth is patient. It waits for cracks to appear in the performance, and they always do. Still, that didn't make the silence easy. My instinct was to defend myself, to scream the truth until the walls shook. But I remembered his face when I told him I'd heard everything. Guilt, panic, no denial. I didn't need to fight to prove what I already knew. So I stayed quiet. But people notice things when you stop talking. They start piecing things together on their own. One of his so-called supporters messaged me privately a week later. Hey, I know Steven's telling everyone you went off on him, but can I ask you something? If the power went out like he claims, why didn't he just call an electrician? He is an electrician, isn't he? That message made me laugh, though it also carried a bitter edge. Exactly. Why hadn't he fixed it himself? Why was his story so vague, his details so thin? The more Steven tried to push his narrative, the more holes appeared. People remembered things. Real, undeniable things. They remembered who built his website when he couldn't figure out WordPress. They remembered who paid for his first ad campaign because his bank account was nearly empty. They remembered who drove across town in a storm just to drop off hot food when he was working late. And it wasn't Monica. That truth didn't need me to defend it. It defended itself. Still, I'd be lying if I said the smear campaign didn't hurt. It did. Sitting alone at night, scrolling through comments, knowing people were laughing at a story where I was cast as the villain, it gnawed at me. My hands itched to type responses, to set the record straight. But then I'd think of Monica, of the way he had said, she's sweet but she's not you. If I fought back, I'd still be playing the role he wrote for me. And I was done with that. Said I waited. Patient, watchful, steady. And sure enough, the unraveling came. A friend told me about a gathering he'd been at where Steven's story shifted mid-sentence. First he said you cut the power, she explained. Then later he said the breaker tripped on its own. He couldn't keep it straight. Another friend admitted she asked him directly why I supposedly lost control. He just said, you know how women get. That answer didn't sit well with her. She told me she walked away from the conversation thinking less of him than of me. The cracks widened with every retelling. His smug quotes on Instagram, his desperate attempts at playing the victim, they all began to look less like truth and more like theater. People saw it. They might not have said it out loud yet, but I could feel the tide shifting. One evening, I bumped into a mutual acquaintance outside a cafe. She hesitated, then finally said, Laura, I know what Steven's been saying, but honestly, it doesn't add up. You don't strike me as the type to lose your head like that. Her words warmed something in me I hadn't realized was cold. People weren't buying it, not all of them anyway. Some were already questioning, doubting, reconsidering. And that was enough for me. Because truth doesn't shout. It lingers. It waits. And slowly, it dismantles lies piece by piece, until the liar stands exposed with nothing left but his own shadow. And Steven? He was standing closer to that shadow every day. The silence that followed Steven's unraveling lies should have been enough punishment. But life has a way of adding its own twist, and this time karma had impeccable timing. Monica was never coming back. I didn't learn it from Steven. I learned it through the same grapevine he had used to smear me. A friend messaged me late one evening with a link. "You'll want to see this," she wrote. I opened it and there she was. Monica, radiant in a new photo, leaning into the shoulder of a man I had never seen before. He wasn't Steven. He wasn't even close. The man was older, dressed sharp in a suit that screamed confidence and stability. His arm wrapped around her waist like he had claimed her fully, not tentatively. The caption beneath the picture read something simple. "Some chapters close so better ones can begin." I almost laughed. The very woman Steven had built his fantasies around had already closed the door on him, and he didn't even know it yet. 4 days afterward, I heard little whispers. Monica was back with her real ex, the one she'd been pining for long before Steven and I ever crossed paths. She had strung him along, feeding him crumbs of attention the same way he had done to me. And suddenly I understood. Steven hadn't been the player he thought he was. He was a pawn, moved around on Monica's board without ever realizing he was expendable. But instead of facing that truth, he doubled down on desperation. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from a friend. A screenshot of Steven asking her for help. Any idea how to undo what Laura did to the circuit? The irony nearly doubled me over. The man who bragged endlessly about his skills, who strutted around with his business name engraved on a bracelet, couldn't even reset his own breaker without me. I didn't reply. He wasn't just blocked on my phone, he was blocked in my mind. The version of me that would have pitied him, that would have run back to fix things, was gone. But he didn't give up easily. When his messages went unanswered, he took the coward's route, calling my mother. My sweet, soft-spoken mother who rarely said a harsh word about anyone. He must have expected her to plead on his behalf, to soften me with guilt. Instead, she told me about it later, laughing in disbelief. "He called asking if I could convince you to talk to him," she said, shaking her head. "So I told him, if my daughter shut your lights off, I'm sure you earned the darkness." Then I hung up. I couldn't have written it better myself. Still, the final blow hadn't landed yet, not until Monica herself made it public. It was a Saturday morning when I saw it, her new post on Instagram. A picture of her and the suited man, smiling like they had nothing to hide. Her hand rested on his chest, her ring finger adorned with a glimmer of gold. The comments were filled with congratulations, heart emojis, excitement about their future. And Steven? Silent. For all his cryptic quotes, his loud accusations, his campaign against me, he had nothing left to say now. Because Monica hadn't just moved on. She had traded up. She left him stranded in the very fantasy he built, chasing her shadow while she stood in the light of someone else. I imagined his face when he saw that post, the sinking realization that he had gambled everything and lost it all. The humiliation of knowing the world could see her happiness and his absence in it. And for once I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt peace. Because I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to expose him, defend myself, or craft my own revenge. Monica had written the ending for him and life had delivered the punchline. And Steven? He was still in the dark. For a full week after Monica's announcement, I didn't hear a single word from Steven. No calls. No whispers. Not even a passive-aggressive post online. It was like the man had vanished into his own humiliation, hiding from the very world he once tried to manipulate. But then came the knock. It was early evening, the sky outside painted in soft shades of orange and purple. I had just settled in with a cup of tea, the kind of small comfort I'd been savoring lately, when the pounding on my door shattered the quiet. At first I didn't want to answer. My instinct told me exactly who it was. And when I finally opened the door, my suspicion was confirmed. Steven. But not the Steven I remembered. This version of him looked nothing like the confident man who once strutted into rooms with his head high. His hair was greasy, clumped together as if he hadn't washed it in days. His shirt was wrinkled, a faint stain spreading near the collar. His eyes were hollow, framed by dark circles. The charm that once drew me in was gone, replaced by the desperation of a man who had lost everything. "I messed up," he said, his voice cracking in places he tried to steady. I stood still, my hand braced against the doorframe, watching him unravel. He didn't cry, not exactly, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He spoke quickly, as if spilling the words before they slipped away. "I miss you." I was confused. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You know me, Laura, you know me." I I held up a hand. My silence had always unsettled him more than my words, and tonight I let it work for me. His rambling faltered. His shoulders slumped. For the first time he looked less like a man begging for forgiveness and more like a boy caught in the aftermath of his own decisions. I took a slow breath, then said the words that had been waiting on my tongue since the moment I left his apartment. "You were never even a real boyfriend," I told him. My tone was calm, almost detached. "You were a project I finished and walked away from." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth but nothing came out. Without another word I shut the door. The click of the lock was final. A boundary drawn not with anger but with certainty. I leaned against the wood for a moment, my heart racing, not from fear but from release. No arguments. No closure. Just an ending that belonged to me. The next morning I found it. A folded envelope lying on my porch, the edges smudged as if his hands had been shaking when he left it. My stomach tightened as I picked it up, debating whether to read it at all. But curiosity won. 3 pages. Handwritten. His scrawl messy, uneven. The first line was an apology, grand, sweeping, empty. "I never meant to hurt you. I was stupid. I was scared." The next was a string of excuses. He was confused about Monica. He felt pressured starting his business. He didn't know how to handle the way I cared for him, how it made him feel both grateful and inadequate. Then came the guilt trips. "No one has ever supported me the way you did. I don't know how I'll ever survive without you. You know I can't do this alone." But the final line was the one that stuck. "You didn't have to humiliate me like that." I read it twice, 3 times, letting the bitterness seep through the ink. He wasn't sorry for the betrayal. He wasn't sorry for stringing me along. He was sorry for being exposed, for losing the control he thought he had over me. I set the letter down on the counter, a wry smile tugging at my lips. Because he was wrong. I did have to humiliate him. I had to strip away the facade he built to show him, and myself, that I wasn't the weak placeholder he imagined. That I had the power to walk away, to shut the lights off, to end the performance on my terms. And if I had to do it again I would. Without hesitation. I folded his letter neatly back into the envelope and set it aside like something rotten I didn't care to touch again. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. No tossing, no tears. Just a steady calm that settled in once I realized there was nothing left between us except his bitterness, and bitterness couldn't reach me anymore. But Stephen wasn't finished. 2 days later my phone buzzed with a strange number. Against my better judgment I answered, thinking it might be a work call. The second I heard his voice my stomach turned. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You think you can walk away from me like that? I hope you end up alone, Laura. That's what you deserve." And there it was, the real Stephen. Not the charming man who once teased me in hardware stores, not the dreamer with big plans. Just a bitter, entitled man-child lashing out because his safety net had finally slipped away. I didn't reply. I hung up and blocked the number immediately, my hand steady this time. His words didn't shake me, they clarified things. That was who he'd been all along. Selfish, manipulative, and terrified of losing control. When the silence grew, I expected my friends to stay quiet too, to hold on to the doubts he had planted with his smear campaign. But something surprising happened instead. My phone began lighting up with messages not from him, but from the very people who had once believed his story. "Laura, I'm sorry. I should have known better. I can't believe I listened to him. You didn't deserve that. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." One by one they came back, not in dramatic apologies, but in quiet admissions that felt genuine. And strangely enough, it meant more to me than any grand gesture of revenge ever could. Not because I needed their validation, but because it showed me that the truth had done its job. Slowly, steadily, it had revealed itself. That was the moment I decided not to waste another ounce of energy on Stephen. No responses. No counterattacks. No lingering bitterness. Just silence. I poured myself into peace. Long walks became my therapy, each step carrying me further from the chaos he left behind. I'd stop at the little cafe on the corner, order coffee, and let the morning sun warm my face. Music played softly in my ears. Old songs I loved but had forgotten while trying so hard to keep up with his moods. Evenings were for laughter again. I invited friends over, the real ones, the ones who had always been there beneath the noise. We sat around my kitchen table sipping tea and telling stories, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to defend myself. I could just be. But the biggest shift came at home. For years I'd waited on men to fix things. To patch the leaky faucet, to mend the squeaky gate, to replace the cracked tile in the kitchen. With Stephen it had been the same, him promising to get around to repairs that never happened. I had believed him because it was easier than believing in myself. Not anymore. One Saturday I rolled up my sleeves and started small, replacing the squeaky cabinet hinge in the kitchen. Took patience, a little trial and error, but when I heard the door close smoothly for the first time in months, I grinned. It wasn't just about the cabinet. It was about proving to myself that I could. From there I moved on to the back gate. Rusted hinges, a loose latch. I spent the afternoon sanding, tightening, oiling. By evening the gate swung shut with a satisfying click. I stood in the yard, wiping sweat from my forehead, feeling prouder than I had in years. The kitchen tiles came next. One by one I replaced the broken ones, kneeling on the floor with tools spread around me. It was messy, frustrating, and more than once I muttered under my breath. But when I finally looked at the smooth, unbroken surface, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't need Stephen to fix anything. I never had. What I needed was clarity, and now I had it. I realized then that he had never been my heartbreak. He was my blessing in disguise. A harsh one, an ugly one, but a blessing nonetheless. He forced me to see the truth, to rebuild, to discover strength in places I had overlooked. Sitting on my porch one evening, the air warm and the world quiet, I thought back to everything. The bracelet, the routines, the promises. And for the first time I didn't ache. I didn't wonder what might have been. Instead I felt gratitude, for the clarity, for the peace, for the silence that no longer scared me. Stephen had wanted me to regret walking away. But all I felt was freedom. No contact. No regrets. I often wonder what he imagined would happen once the dust settled. Maybe he thought I'd linger in the background, still circling him like a planet around a sun, waiting for Monica to falter so he could turn back to me. Maybe he believed I'd cling to the scraps of what we had, desperate enough to ignore the truth I'd overheard that night. But he misread me. I wasn't a placeholder. I wasn't a stand-in to keep his pride afloat. I was the woman who had shown up, given freely, cared deeply, and built something real out of nothing. He fumbled me for a ghost. The beauty of it is that ghosts can't stay forever. Monica drifted off into her new life, hand in hand with someone else. And Stephen? He was left grasping at empty air. I don't picture him often anymore, but when I do, it's not with longing. It's with a clear, unshaken image. Him sitting in that dim apartment of his, tools scattered around, the bracelet I bought collecting dust somewhere in a drawer. Lights humming again, yes, but the warmth gone. Power restored, but presence missing. That's what he earned, silence. Meanwhile I live free. Free from manipulation, free from the constant guessing game of whether I was enough, free from being someone's emotional crutch while they chased someone else. I stopped carrying his weight the moment I shut that door, and I never picked it back up. The first time I realized how different life felt was one morning, weeks later. I brewed my coffee, opened the blinds, and felt sunlight pour across the kitchen tiles I had fixed myself. That little detail, the smoothness under my bare feet, made me smile. It wasn't just about a floor. It was about a life I had rebuilt, steady and mine. Friends noticed the change too. They said my laugh came easier, my shoulders sat straighter, my voice had a strength it hadn't before. And they were right. There's a lightness that comes when you finally set down what was never yours to carry. I filled my days with small joys. Long walks where I breathed in fresh air like medicine. Music in the mornings, the kind that lifted me instead of breaking me down. Even the quiet became precious. A silence I once feared now wrapped around me like peace itself. And sometimes when I'd pass a hardware store or see someone fiddling with a breaker box, I'd chuckle to myself. A private reminder that I was no longer holding a flashlight for someone else's dreams. My hands, my light, my energy, all of it now belonged to me. Stephen thought he had the last word. He thought his smear campaign, his insults, his bitter letter would leave scars. But in the end, all they left was clarity. The kind that doesn't fade, the kind that shines brighter with time. Because here's the truth I finally learned. Some lights once turned off don't come back on. And some women, once they walk away, never look back. That was my brightest ending. If this story of betrayal and karma kept you hooked, tap that like button right now. My favorite part was when Laura flipped the switch and walked away for good. What was your favorite moment? Tell me in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of resilience. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what's next.